I got a book. I got a Archibald on my lap. What more could you need in life, really? Check out this boy on my lap. I'm not afraid to use it, not at all. My alarm is ringing. It's all coming together, baby. Look at this. We got an Archibald. Look at this Archibald. Oh, ah! Baby. We got a book called Man Fucked His House by a guy called Brian Asman. Such a cuddly cat. He's so warm. So this is a fine evening we got. I'm hella sleepy. It's I got my coffee in my mug. You grew 5 meters today, Waterfall. Congratulations. You're a beaming marble. You're beaming like a beam of light. Or perhaps a beam in a house. She is a little bit, I bet, yeah. Sometimes she still gets on my lap if I position myself correctly, but yeah, she usually doesn't do that anymore. But yes, we got a book today. We'll be reading it. The House. Fuck it. That is the general gist of today. Archibald, you looking at me like that? It's so cute. How I'll do, I will be reading a book. As always, I won't be responding much to messages as the book reading happens. 390 stream streak. Oh my god, you're approaching the big 400, baby. But yes, let me just turn off. Make sure all my sounds are turned off. That should be turned off. Upcoming ads off. Oh my god. Oh, what the hell is happening? Okay. Oh no, my OBS windows are freaking out. Okay. This is good. I'll put this here. I'll put that up there. I think. Yeah, okay. Turn this music off. Turn on the good reading music, the chill music. Desktop audio, turn on. And loop chat. Do 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 do. Okay, we're ready. We got this book here. It is a horror book. A horror comedy book, apparently. I know only the title of this book, nothing else really. And one guy on Reddit said it was fun, so I guess that's all I have. It is a good title. Archibald is really warm on my lap right now. Alright, let's read Man Fucked His House by Brian Assman. Good name, good title. Before. Through the upstairs windows the house watched, and waited, and despaired until every last glimmer of hope leached from its bones, the all-consuming emptiness, a blight more entropic than any dry rot, bowing its eaves, bending its beams, cracking its foundations, living it a cicada skin, a vacant replica of the thing it once was, doomed to wither and flake, and, battered by the dumb vagaries of man and nature alike, eventually dissolve into the wind. And then, Sunday. Shortly after lunchtime, a beige Toyota Camry took a long, lugubrious left into James Circle, the back end sagging from the combined weight of the Haskins family and what worldly possessions weren't left for the movers. "This is it, team," Hal Haskins said brightly. Hal was a man whose personality favored his car's paint job, prone to dad jokes and bland observations. His hobbies included checkers, Roth IRAs, and assorted flavors of sports ball. His word. Even played a little sports ball, too, when his strict knee allowed it. "Aren't you excited, kids?" Sabrina Haskins asked, twisting around in her seat to regard her literal 2.5 children. 10-year-old Damien had eaten his own twin in the womb, or absorbed him, as the OB-gynecologist corrected. But she couldn't quite part with the notion she'd given birth to a cannibal. For years, she woke up in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, terrified she was pregnant all over again. Her son digging his way out of her uterus with a pickaxe jury-rigged from his dead brother's bones, gasping for breath as her own blood rushing from her wounds, threatening to drown him. His older sister, Michaela, barely looked up from her phone long enough to roll her eyes. Whatever. Sabrina was excited, even if the kids couldn't be bothered. She'd always thought of Columbus as a stop on the way to bigger and better things, but after dropping out of Ohio State mid-sophomore year to pursue her real passion, getting groped by hot sauce-fingered rednecks at Hooters, she'd gotten stuck there. Then she'd met Hal, who came in one night with his co-workers for a plate of mild wings and exactly 2 beers. Maybe they hadn't fallen in love, per se, but he was a good guy with a steady job selling reverse mortgages to widows. Part of her always figured something would change. What specifically, she couldn't say. And then life would be somehow different. More exciting. More interesting. But it hadn't. 4 years in Columbus turned into 14. 2 kids, stretch marks, a series of part-time jobs and aborted stints at community college. Sabrina literally tried to get into basket weaving. Basket weaving! Her other recurring nightmare involved becoming the world's foremost weaver of baskets, basically the Martha Stewart of basketry. Flying off to Paris or Dubai at a moment's notice to weave a basket for some foreign dignitary or oil sheik. Becoming famous was one thing, but becoming famous for something so gosh darn boring seemed like its own special kind of HE double hockey sticks. So when Hal came home from work one day and told her he'd been offered a big promotion, but they'd have to move, she didn't even ask where. Columbus was a fine town, but she needed a change so badly anywhere would be an improvement. She'd never heard of Jackson Hill, but it was apparently one of America's most desirable small cities. Whataburger had even opened a franchise there the year before. Maybe it wasn't San Fran or Seattle or even the less murdery parts of St. Louis, but she kind of liked that. The whole city seemed like a blank envelope. Anything could be inside. She could reinvent herself, become whatever she wanted. If only she could figure out what that was. The Camry came to a halt outside a 2-story Craftsman with a brand new siding and a slightly overgrown yard. Across the street, in front of a house, painted a very off-putting mustard yellow, a gray braided lady glanced up from her flower beds long enough to wave at the Haskins family with a pair of shears. Sabrina tried to wave back, but the lady had already looked away. 1, 2, 3, brake! Hal said, shutting off the car. Sabrina grabbed her purse off the floor and got out, legs stiff from spending the last 6 hours in the car. And another 12 the day before that. The trip only broken up by brief stops at gas stations and a night at a Motel 3. Half the price, twice the fun. Where she'd had to leave the Gideon Bible with a confused front desk clerk because Damien wouldn't stop ripping out the pages. The fall breeze ruffled her hair pleasantly. "Just got a text," Hal said, coming around the car. "The movers are late. Go figure, right?" Sabrina looked at her husband and winced. Powdered sugar from their gas station donut breakfast dappled his face. She slipped a crumpled napkin from her purse and dabbed his left cheek. I'm fine. Hal craned his neck away. Jeez. Just trying to help, Sabrina rapped on the car window. Kids? Michaela reached for the handle, frowned, slapped the window. Sorry, Hal said, leaning back in the driver's side. Forgot the child locks. Ever since Damien tried to bail out on the freeway, both Haskins' children had to suffer the indignity of child locks. Now freed, both took their sweet time getting out of the car. Michaela, to her credit, slipped her phone into her jeans and acted like she was part of the moment. Damien, however, stood sullenly in the driveway, staring down at his feet. Hal dropped into a crouch next to his son. What's wrong, champ? I don't like it. The words came out cold, monotone, like most everything Damien said. What's not to like, buddy? Damien shook his head and said no more. Such a freak, Michaela muttered. I heard that, young lady, Sabrina said, then cringed because she sounded like her mother, a severe and uncompromising woman who choked to death on a California roll when Sabrina was in high school. Whenever Sabrina said anything too overtly, motherly, she imagined her throat closing up, her skin turning blue, and her two children laughing their butts off while she clawed impotently at the air. Hal hefted Damien up on his shoulders. Come on, let's check out our new digs. I think you'll really like it once you get your bearings. Stooped under the weight of his son, Hal staggered up the flagstones to the front door, Michaela trailing behind. Sabrina watched her family for a moment, heart swelling. They weren't perfect, but they were hers, then hurried to join them. The house was unbelievable. They, with the exception of Michaela, who rushed upstairs to inspect her unfurnished new room, and Damien, there in body but not in spirit, started with a tour of the house. The front door led to a foyer, a stairwell heading straight up to the second story. To their left was the living room, a roomy space with hardwood floors. They poked their heads in, noting the curving archway, then headed towards the kitchen, recently updated with granite countertops, a fetching gray-black backsplash, and shiny steel appliances. Even better, the counters seemed to go on for days. Another door led to the empty dining room, which connected through to the living room. Sabrina couldn't wait to cook a meal without banging a shin or elbow on something. The porch, Hal declared, stepping through a door at the rear of the house. Thanks to the school schedule and the speed of the move, he was the only one who had seen the new house so far. Sabrina followed him to a screened-in porch looking out on the backyard, enclosed by a wood fence. Nothing but trees beyond. Other side's a state park, Hal said, setting Damien down on the back steps. The boy wandered into the yard and sat in the grass, cross-legged. He commenced massacring dandelions, blowing fluff away with a soft poof of his lips. Sabrina didn't want to think about whatever the boy might be wishing for. The yard wasn't huge, but that would make it easier to maintain. Damien could probably mow the lawn in a few passes, one of the few household chores he'd do, heavily supervised by Hal. And they had a shiny metal shed, one of those prefab jobs. Maybe she could take up gardening, get their new neighbor, the old lady with the shears, to give her some pointers. Finally turn that black thumb green. Can we see the upstairs? Sabrina asked. Hal nodded. Wait till you see the master bedroom. He cupped a hand to the side of his mouth. Let's go, buddy. Damien didn't even look up. He's fine, Sabrina said, grabbing Hal by the arm. Together they went back and through the kitchen. Passing the stairs, Sabrina noted the door she hadn't seen on the way in. Where's that go? Basement? Hal said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. Sabrina shrugged it off. She wanted to get a look at the bedrooms first. Specifically hers. If they'd redone the master bath like the kitchen. Hal stomped on the stairs. They sure don't make them like this anymore. Solid construction. This thing will still be standing when we're long gone, I'll tell you that. Sabrina froze in her tracks, goose flesh standing up on her arms. The idea of the house outlasting not only her and Hal but her children too seemed perverse. But that wasn't all. Long gone was totally relative. The house need not survive into some far-flung future, when polar bears are extinct and the eastern seaboard lay completely underwater, fish swimming in and out of the broken windows of submerged IKEAs. If the Haskins family dropped off the face of the earth that very day, the house would only have to stand a few years longer to make Hal's Confucian wisdom come true. What's long gone, anyway? Brina? Hal called from the top of the stairs. What the hell had gotten into her? She hadn't had thoughts like these in a long time, not since the months directly after Damien's birth. Coming, she replied, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He was waiting at the landing. A door to the right leaned open, revealing the children's bathroom. She poked her head in and cringed. The tub, sink, and tile all looked older. Maybe not original, but definitely not updated like the kitchen. Plus, the old owners had left them a shower curtain, a clear plastic, duck emblazoned affair Michaela was sure to love. Maybe she wouldn't be using this bathroom, but she couldn't help but feel disappointed. It certainly wasn't as lovely as the rest of the house. Hal pushed open the next door. I was thinking this could be Damien's room. Sure. She found she didn't really care to see the rest of the house. Too worried the master bath would be late 80s travesty like the kids' bathroom. The door across from Damien's was wide open, a slightly bigger facsimile with purple curtains hanging over the windows. This was supposed to be Michaela's, Hal mumbled, his head slowly swiveling to the door at the end of the hall. The closed door at the end of the hall. Don't get too comfortable in there, Sabrina called, although her daughter probably had her AirPods shoved firmly in her either ear. She advanced quickly down the hall and flung the door open. The room was empty, the only movement from the lazily circling ceiling fan. Sabrina crossed the room, poked her head into the master bath. She barely had time to feel relief at the glossy teal tile, the whirlpool tub, the separate shower stall, features she'd coveted for years because Michaela wasn't there either. That your dream bathroom or what, hun? Hal said. Imagine soaking in that tub, some candles, red wine, and me. Sabrina turned. Where's Michaela? Hal shrugged. Around? Michaela, Sabrina called, her voice echoing off the walls. Down the hallway, a toilet flushed. A beat later, a door creaked open. Mom, Michaela yelled. There's no soap. Give me the hand sanitizer. Sabrina frowned, digging in her purse until she found a small plastic bottle of Germex and headed down to the hall. Michaela stuck both hands out in a gesture that seemed plaintive, despite her demanding tone. Give me the hand sanitizer, please, Sabrina said, pushing the bottle into her daughter's hands. Whatever. Michaela squirted gel into one palm and handed the bottle back, then walked off down the hall, rubbing her hands together. Which one's mine? Right here, monkey, Hal said. Ugh, don't call me that. Michaela's door slammed. Sabrina turned to Hal. That was weird. Par for the course, she's practically a teenager. No, that's not what I mean. Sabrina cocked her chin at the master bedroom. I thought she was in our room. Why would she be in our room? I don't know. Something about the last few minutes didn't track. Maybe Michaela had come downstairs while they'd been in the backyard, gone out to the car or something. Must have, Sabrina thought. She stepped into the kids' bathroom, thinking she'd leave her sanitizer on the sink until they unpacked and found the hand soap. A little surprised Michaela didn't have a cutting remark ready about the childish duck-covered shower curtain. The second Sabrina stepped into the bathroom, it all made sense. And didn't. A plain white shower curtain hung where the ducks had been. Okay, let's take a short break on each. Drink some water. Let's see. Too big of a gulp of water. Ow. My throat. Let's see what's going on. Hi, Eisenheim. Hello. Oh, that's my alarm. Goodbye, alarm. Sin Mini, an astounding marble shell. You're a crazy marble. And a beaming marble for waterfall and esteemed for Eisenheim. You all get marks of quality. Wow. But no, I'm not familiar with HELL. Or HE hockey sticks or whatever the hell that was. You know, I expected more profanity from a book titled Man Fuck This House. But yeah, it seems like this is like setting up a fairly like typical like, oh man, the horror family moves in, huh? And the house is spooky. Let me just get rid of this mysterious phlegm in the back of my throat, and then we can read on. But isn't the hockey stick like kind of like diagonal? Hockey stick. I guess it's like a J. Kinda. Depends on the stick, I guess. It's a hedge. Heard very often in sitcom. L enough, I guess. It's a lowercase L. Okay. Man, why am I so phlegmy today? Also, I don't know why we keep reading hands as pants. That's just the way it is with our single brain cell. So this book doesn't seem to have strict chapters either. It only has these little pictures of a house in it. At the end sometimes. Hold on, let me show you. Pip. See, it's got little house pictures there. All right, let's continue this. The second Damien was absolutely sure nobody was watching, he stopped picking stupid dandelions and stood behind the shed, pulling his phone from his pants pocket. Fortnite time! Damien lived through these moments when no one was watching. He'd never felt particularly comfortable in his own skin until he was 6 and heard a lady on TV talking about something called an old soul. That fit him to a T. He wasn't completely uninterested in childish things. He lived for a silly multiplayer shooter filled with goofy fish people and exploding llamas. But he'd always been wiser, smarter, and more mature than his years. A committed rationalist, he didn't believe in past lives per se, but he often got flashes of fabricated memories that led him to believe he played a role in the Renaissance. Not Leonardo or Michelangelo or anyone famous enough to become a Ninja Turtle 5 centuries later, but some tangential bit player who maybe painted a fresco in a shed on the Vatican grounds or something. Because he was so perceptive, from a young age he picked up on how Sabrina looked at him, like a freak. He'd overheard her and his father arguing once, and while he didn't understand everything they were talking about, he looked up Parasitic Twin online and was taken aback. Somehow Sabrina thought it was his fault that he bore responsibility for the viability of the other fetus with whom he'd briefly shared a womb. As if a naturally occurring phenomena were somehow strange or evil or just plain intentional. His own brain had barely formed at the time. Reabsorption simply happened. And yet she called him a cannibal. Never mind that he hadn't actually eaten the other twin. One would think a half-college educated woman might have some inkling what went on inside her own body, but no. Damien wasn't a particularly fearful child, but one thing that scared the absolute bejesus out of him was the ignorance of adults. Forget Santa Claus, that plump and preposterous pseudo-deity he'd never even for a second believed in. Okay, one time, but he was 3 and he really, really wanted that big hug Elmo. For science, totally for science. The biggest lie he'd believed as a child was that adults knew what they were doing. They absolutely did not. In Damien's eyes, the dividing line betwixt adult and child was simply how self-serious once was. Children thought the moon was made of cheese. Adults believed in more complex but equally silly things like government. Everything was one big joke. So Damien decided to play the biggest one he could think of. Convincing Sabrina he was a precocious but decidedly non-evil child was a waste of time. She'd named him after the hellspawn in the Omen after all. No, he'd lean into it. Act strange, aloof, creepy even. His own private joke on the world, and the fools who'd brought him into it. They had no idea he liked Fortnite, peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and the flippin' Wiggles, of all things. A musical group he appreciated ironically, of course. Only his sister Michaela, so confident, knew the real Damien. Hence his behavior on the front lawn. He'd hoped to unsettle his parents with a single unexplained comment. I don't like it. And he'd easily succeeded. After Sabrina seemed distracted, fearful. Time to celebrate. He tried to open the Fortnite app, but only had one bar. A quick search of the neighbor's Wi-Fi network yielded nothing, unsecured or otherwise. The Haskins family network wouldn't be set up until at least midweek, if not later. He was about to wander inside to look at baseboards or stand silently in the corner of the living room when his phone beeped. He figured it was a friend from back home, Marshall or Farouk, both 2 grades above him and bright for their age, about as mature friends as a 10-year-old could hope to make. But he didn't recognize the number, and the area code was local to Jackson Hill. Odd. Damien opened the message. It simply said, "Sup." He wondered if a neighboring kid had somehow gotten his number. Maybe from his parents. Most likely his idiot father, because Sabrina at least had the good sense not to inflict her demonic child upon others. Hal was always trying to make friends for him, sometimes with hilarious results, like the time he'd brought a bunch of ice cream from Baskin-Robbins and tried to talk some kids at the playground into coming to Damien's 7th birthday party. Damien, for his part, had blown out the candles on his cake, never knowing one of his greatest wishes had come true. At that moment, his father was sitting broken-nosed and black-eyed in a jail cell, charged with attempted kidnapping, while the parents who beat the living snot out of him got off scot-free. Damien considered a single-word message for a long moment, then decided anyone who texted a new acquaintance something as banal and flat-out lazy as "sup" didn't merit a response. He slipped out from behind the shed, straightening his posture into the rigid, straight-legged robotic walk he used whenever Sabrina might be watching. His phone buzzed again. "I ask you a question, little man." Straight up rude. Damien had quite a few opinions on that. Rude in his book was texting a stranger out of the blue and acting as if one were entitled to his time, but decided not to enlighten the mysterious texture on the finer points of etiquette a la Haskins. Once again, a text popped up. "I can see you ignoring me." Damien's heart thumped. Clutching his phone tightly to his chest, he turned around in a slow circle, expecting some teenage goofus to be hanging over the fence. But he didn't see anyone, and he didn't think anyone at the windows of the neighboring houses could see directly into the backyard where he stood. For once, the unsettling boy was himself unsettled, and Damien didn't care for that one bit. "Who is this? What do you want?" A set of ellipses popped up, indicating his stalker seemed hysterical, but discomfortingly accurate. Mystery Texter was writing what looked like a long response. Damien stood there in the middle of the yard, waiting for this response to come through. But it didn't. He shot a nervous glance up at the house, hoping Sabrina wouldn't see him doing something so quotidian as having a text message conversation. Luckily, the rest of the family seemed preoccupied. He turned his attention back to the phone. Those cursed ellipses, threatening another strange and overly familiar message. After 5 minutes, he headed inside. As he grabbed the screen door, his phone pinged once again. The message was short, but easily the most unnerving yet. You'll see. The movers arrived. Eventually, just as the sun dipped down behind the mustard yellow house across the street, lugging the Haskins' possessions into the house with supreme disregard for the brand new paint job, scraping incoherent graffiti into the walls with bed frames and wardrobes. Sabrina tried to redirect the men, but they paid little attention, and she quickly resigned herself to stopping by Home Depot with a few paint chips to try to match the house's hues. Despite the collateral damage, the movers were efficient, unloading their stuff in an hour. Hal dithered over tipping the men or simply offering them a beer, but they waved him off, leaving the Haskins family alone. Sabrina tried not to feel too overwhelmed by the massive amount of things they needed to do. She decided to get the kitchen situated first, ripping open the heavy cardboard boxes and finding homes for forks, pans, and spatulae, marveling at kitchen gadgets she couldn't remember packing and hadn't used in years. A loud bang echoed through the open window, followed by a yelp and some very inventive cursing. Sabrina looked out into the backyard. Her husband pogoed around on one leg, clutching his shin. The shed doors open, and the family mower waiting patiently just below the raised 6-inch lip. Hal hopped around in a circle, then rubbed his chin, face red. Then, gingerly limping, Hal grabbed the mower's handle, pushed down so the wheels cleared that little step up into the shed, and muscled the mower into his new home. Sabrina smiled, shaking her head. Hal could be a real goof sometimes, but he was her goof. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. It's nadir the moment Hal presented her with another box marked kitchen stuff, requiring a near-total reconfiguration of the work she'd already done, and by nightfall, even though they still had a lot to do, the house felt at least a little bit like home. Sabrina took Hal's car to the store, bought groceries, and cooked their first meal, a pretty okay pot roast with baked potatoes and veggies. After dinner, Sabrina even coaxed the kids, plus her husband, who'd found the local AM sports station and had become otherwise useless, into playing a family game of Monopoly. Even Damien, who usually shunned family time but could be talked into it if there was money involved, fake or otherwise. Even when Sabrina landed her thimble on Park Place, dotted with Damien's hotels, and had to pay him an exorbitant sum to keep free, she didn't mind. For once, the whole family sat together, talking and laughing and pretending they liked each other. This, Sabrina thought to herself, this is what real families are like. Later, falling asleep, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, a change was all they needed. And from now on, in this strange new town called Jackson Hill, everything would be fine. Right before everything went black, she could have sworn she heard a voice whisper, "No." The Haskins family slept. The house did not. End of chapter. Well, right, need to drink some more water and such, and then my coffee is probably cooled down enough that I can actually caffeinate. Yeah, the child is great. He's just creeping around like, it's like those horror movie children who like stand around with their arms at their sides for no reason, because that's the only thing they can expect a child to really act, you know. It is, I'm more used to reading, no, yeah, that was some's like, nah. I'm more used to reading fantasy and sci-fi books, so it's really, really strange when the book is like referring to real-world things like Fortnite and Ninja Turtles and whatever. I don't usually, see that in media very much. Is that meta? I wouldn't say so. This is just real life, I guess. Hey, Ariboofs, thank you for the lurk. But yeah, that's all I got to say, really. I guess that's because I mostly play video games for my stories, and those don't refer to real-world things ever. Because of licensing. It's only movies that do that sometimes. But anyway, let me just have a sip of my coffee and continue on. Actually, yeah, I can continue on for now. Ooh. Okay. My throat. Phlegmy phlegm. Monday. 30 minutes before noon, it finally occurred to Sabrina that she could actually sit down. The morning passed by in a whirlwind. Up by 6, packing lunches, making sure every member of the family had what they needed to get where they were going, and dodging all the box possessions they'd yet to put away. Effectively fighting both her children, a two-fronted verbal fencing match where both Michaela and an oddly verbose Damien trotted out a laundry list of reasons why they shouldn't have to start school yet. Not on their third day in Jackson Hill. Inhumane, according to the younger Haskinses. Prisoners of war could expect better treatment. Meanwhile, Hal couldn't find his shaving kit. Then his pants. Finally walked downstairs wearing a shirt sport coat combo that made Sabrina cringe. But she gave him a peck on the cheek and sent him on his way. A brown bag lunch tucked in the briefcase he only carried because his elderly clients expected it from him. Getting the kids on their way was a much more difficult proposition, and Sabrina briefly considered handcuffing them together so neither of them wouldn't get lost. But given they were headed to separate schools, that would have presented all manner of difficulties. Finally, she got them out the door, reminding them she could easily see the bus stop from the living room window. Fine, just don't come out here, Michaela said, rolling her eyes. She grabbed her little brother's hand and dragged him out the door. Good as her word, Sabrina peeled back the drapes and watched them ambush the bus stop at the end of the street. No other children waited next to the stop sign. Sabrina wondered if the other neighbors even had kids. Somebody must, in a cul-de-sac with 4 houses. And if the other parents drove their kids to school, that got her wondering if there was some sort of carpool she could join. Her own Sienna hadn't arrived yet, shipped cross-country separately since Life Crate didn't handle automobiles. Granted, she had enough to do around the house and no urgent errands to run, but the delayed delivery of her car stretched out the move, when she only wanted to get settled into their new life. The elementary bus pulled up. Damien managed to board without biting anyone. Michaela sat with her back against the stop sign and played with her phone until the next bus came. After spying on her kids, Sabrina made more coffee and set about organizing the never-ending boxes of Haskins' stuff. Much of the morning was spent reorganizing her own closet, the walk-in she'd always wanted, and transferring Hal's old sporting equipment to new boxes bound for Goodwill. What did the right-handed man need 3 left-handed gloves for? She did the same with some old toys the kid insisted on having. They wouldn't notice. Kind of irritated her. Couldn't they have gotten rid of half this junk back in Columbus? But she learned to pick her battles over the years. Since her Sienna hadn't arrived, Sabrina had the giveaway boxes somewhere they wouldn't be discovered. The basement, which she hadn't even taken a look at yet, seemed perfect. Sweating profusely, she carried one of the heavier junk boxes into the hallway and set it down. She opened the basement door, a gaping black void in front of her. She groped for the light, reaching into the darkness. Apropos of nothing, eventually the dead mouse in the cabinet popped into her head. A chill ran down her spine. She imagined brushing up against something big and furry and rotting. Her hand found the drawstring. A single bulb illuminated the stairwell. A cramped space with rickety stairs and rusting nails stuck in the walls. Sabrina put her foot down and tested the stairs, sturdier than they looked, and figured she'd go down to the basement first. Confirm there was somewhere to put. Wham! 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 Sabrina jumped at the knocks. She turned off the light and shut the basement door. Who could be knocking? Other than the gardening lady on the Saturday, she'd not seen any of the neighbors, and no welcome wagon had stopped by the previous evening. But maybe the other folks who lived in James' circle were overly respectful rather than weird or reclusive. Of course, a family wouldn't want company on their first full day in a new house. Sabrina put her eye to the peephole. Couldn't see anything but a vague smear of shadow. "Hello?" she called. "It's your neighbor," a friendly yet strong female voice replied. Sabrina opened the door to find the older gardener standing on the stoop with a cellophane-wrapped plate of sandwiches. "In Finland they call these porilainen. My own recipe. Kale, seitan, onions, and cucumber with avocado yogurt. Zephyr Rubens, by the way," she said, offering a heavily bejeweled hand. Sabrina gave it a quick shake, apprising her new neighbor. The woman had icy blue eyes and looked like she'd been reverse mugged by the QVC network. Topaz dangled from her ears. 6 or 7 equally bejeweled necklaces hung around her leathery neck. Bangles bangled at her wrists. Sabrina couldn't see the woman's feet beneath her flowy, multicolored skirt, but she probably sported as many toe rings as toes on which to put them. Sabrina said. "Haskins. Nice to meet you. Zephyr. That's an interesting name." "David Crosby gave it to me in 1972. Before then... but I hear I am telling you my life story, and on the front porch. May I come in?" Zephyr wiggled the tray of porilainen. Sabrina blushed. "What was I thinking? Of course you can." She stepped aside, motioning her neighbor into the living room. Zephyr took a single step, then paused, toe over the threshold, a stricken look gripping her face. She stepped back, holding out her sandwich tray. "Terribly sorry. I just remembered the previous engagement. We'll have to catch up another time. My place, maybe? I make the most delicious kava tea. You must try it." "Okay." Sabrina took the plate and stood there awkwardly. "Maybe I'll come by tomorrow." Zephyr nodded quickly. "Do that. Bye now." She turned and hurried off down the front steps, taking them 2 at a time. Sabrina watched her cross the cul-de-sac, never once looking back. What an odd duck. But at least she brought sandwiches. The porcelain, whatever they were called, were terrible. Sabrina could barely stomach the one and only finish it because her upbringing disallowed her from wasting even a morsel of perfectly good food. The kale and seitan, or whatever it was called, tasted like dirt. Actual dirt. And she'd found herself hovering over the kitchen trash, ready to toss it in after one bite. Ultimately, she choked the rest of the sandwich down, then performed some serious surgery on its fellows, picking off the kale, frying up real bacon, smashing the bread together and turning them into BLTs. more or less. She felt terrible doing all that, such a thoughtful gift. But at the same time, no one else would be eating them if she didn't do something. Was everyone in Jackson Hill like Zephyr, aging hippies who ate awful food and talked about their auras? What could she possibly have in common with them? What do you have in common with anyone? Said the sneaky little voice in the back of her head. Sabrina stretched the cellophane back over her improvised BLTs and put them in the fridge, along with a post-it note that said, "Eat me," next to a tiny drawing of a dinosaur. A T-Rex, just an outline but still recognizable, jaws yawning open. She'd always liked doodling, as long as she could remember. How she met Hal, in fact. That first night at Hooters, when she'd been an orange-shorted waitress, and he a young reverse mortgage salesman at Morgan. She caricatured the man seated next to him, a smallish, thin man with the sort of hook nose that screamed for cartoonification. Hal's boss, it turned out. On some strange impulse, she still couldn't understand herself. She would have surely been fired if humorless Mr. Teague had seen the drawing and complained to her manager. She slipped her sketch to Hal. Later, with his crew of office drones dispersing, he cornered her near the wait station, and the rest was history. Haskins' family history. Sabrina sometimes wondered what life would be like if she hadn't drawn that picture, if she'd drawn other, better pictures. Followed her true passion of taking over the Peanuts comic strip from Charles Schulz. A silly dream, maybe, but now, with the internet, who knows what might have happened? Nothing, the voice said. She slammed the refrigerator shut and returned her interrupted task, the basement. Unfinished, utilitarian, cement floors and exposed wiring, maybe half the size of the first floor. The washer/dryer sat at the bottom of the steps, the furnace opposite. A dark alcove, probably a crawl space, lay beyond. Faint light shone through the 2 windows. Dust motes dancing in the weak rays. Mildew hung in the air. No family room in waiting, this, but the boxes of excess Haskins stuff could be easily stowed. And once her car arrived, she could get rid of it all. Really marry Conduit, like that guru her old friends were so enamored of. Sabrina turned for the stairs and froze. A man was coming down the steps. A big man, well over 6 feet, with equally broad shoulders and a bulging belly hanging out over his ratty sweatpants. His cheeks flushed red, and he had the kind of doughy, simple face incapable of expressing guile or malice. Part of her wanted to scream, but he looked kind and carried the box of Hal's old sports junk. "Where do you want this?" Lips moving soundlessly, Sabrina simply pointed to the wall where the other boxes were stacked. The man nodded, carried the box over, and set it down the indicated spot. He grunted, straightening himself, then ran a hand over one of the older boxes, staring placidly up at the window. Then he walked, trudged really, over to the furnace and hefted his big body up and over the cement wall into the crawl space. Sabrina gaped. Nothing about what happened made sense. If he were a mover, maybe one of the life crate men returned out of a sense of altruism to help the Haskins family get settled, why would he enter without knocking? And even more importantly, why in the world did he crawl into the crawl space? She ran across the basement, house slippers slapping on the concrete, and peered into the crawl space. Small, dank, lousy, with torn-up insulation. Hardly big enough for her, let alone the man who was no longer there. School, as per usual, proved a welcome respite from the stress of family life. At home, Damien had to constantly be on, lest he inadvertently reveal his true nature to Sabrina. At school, he could relax, a little, even though he had to remind himself not to blurt out the answers or condescend to the teacher who usually knew far less than he about any given subject. The flattening of any truly interesting bit of history into a neat, pat narrative, The socio-political complexity of early 20th century Europe, for example. In the years before Gavrilo Princip fired his fatal shot into the neck of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, received only a passing acknowledgement from his old 5th grade teacher in Columbus. Why they continued to employ him rather than simply play Dan Carlin's hardcore history episode on the subject baffled Damien. Still, his first day at Freeling Elementary seemed a qualified success. He'd befriended a few other kids, waxed poetic on his favorite Fortnite drops, and showed them some of his rare skins in his locker like Black Knight. Some of his new friends hadn't even been allowed to play Fortnite back when that skin debuted. Damien found the idea of modulating one's behavior based on parental diktat utterly hilarious, but kept his composure so as not to alienate his new friends, who were all very nice but definitely standard-issue small-town children. True, he decided, no additional messages from the odd and overly familiar Dexter, which made him think it had all been some misunderstanding. When the bus pulled up at the stop near James Circle, he said his goodbye to the bus driver. A dangerous move. If Sabrina ever conversed with the woman, he could be exposed as a thoughtful and caring child, and composed his features into the usual slack, vaguely menacing expression he employed around Sabrina. He trudged up the street, stopping at the end of the driveway to stare up at his new house. All part of the game. Instead of simply walking aside and proceeding to his room, he liked to wait for Sabrina to notice him watching the house like some kind of idiot burglar rather than an actual resident. After 10 minutes, he gave up and walked inside. The house was completely silent, but for the floorboards creaking under his own weight. Damien frowned. They usually had a TV on somewhere, plus Sabrina banging pots and pans together, swiffering the stairs or crying softly into her room where she thought no one could hear her. But now, nothing. He walked toward the kitchen, giving the wooden chair braced under the basement doorknob a sidelong glance. Rats, perhaps? He stuck his head through the doorway. No one in the kitchen either. Perhaps Sabrina was out ingratiating herself to the neighbors, which Damien very much approved of. The woman needed hobbies. Seemed he had the house all to himself, an all too rare event. Perhaps he'd indulge himself in some SpongeBob. Damien turned back towards the living room, and almost screamed. Sabrina stood in the hallway, pale and sweaty, a threadbare blanket wrapped around her, visibly shaking. Her eyes looked sunken, dark. Damien took an instinctive step back, not wanting to risk whatever illness she'd contracted. How was school? Sabrina asked, a question she'd long ago given up asking him. Damien forgot himself for a moment, answered with a simple, normally inflected good. Sabrina nodded, more to herself than in response to what he'd said. Don't go in the basement, okay? There's standing water. Damien stared back at her blankly, giving a single nod to show her he understood. Ordinarily, he'd do more to unsettle her, but she seemed quite out of sorts already. Sabrina seemed to have frozen in the hallway. Between her and the chair barricading the basement door, there wasn't much room to maneuver, so he slipped into the dining room and back around through the living room. He hurried up the stairs, troubled by Sabrina's strange behavior. He was supposed to be the weird one. As he reached the landing, a voice called, "Damien?" Sabrina stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at him. A little bit of color had returned to her face, and her eyes seemed to focus on him this time, rather than merely looking past him. "Yes?" he said, reflexively, natural emotion leaching into what should have been a monotone response. "I'm glad you're home." Damien smiled, against his will, actually smiled, and backed away up the stairs. Something was definitely very wrong. Okay, let's take a short break here. I like the weird guy just kind of walked past and just crawled away. That's really good. Say, hey, you want some help? The helpful, creepy giant man. Hi there, username. How you doing? And I can totally understand Sabrina's mind darting around about all sorts of things. That's what my mind does all the time. I just like remember random bits and bobs of like things when I look at things and get reminded of other bits and bobs. And that's how my entire memory is like. But when I try to remember things, they don't come. It's great. There's a bunch of typos in this book, and it trips me up a bunch. Sometimes there's missing words and stuff. Like sometimes there's like a two missing or something, or like a the missing. You know, stuff like that. But yeah, there's an ad break coming up, so I'll take that real fast so I don't have to interrupt any more chapters. I'll be right back. Ka-chow. Ka-chow. I return to the book reading. I return. My throats still seem to be a bit phlegmy. Perhaps it is the kebabs I ate today that make it so. I don't know. Let's turn back the reading music and continue. Sabrina lay in bed, Hal next to her with a David Baldacci novel, and his right aid reading glasses parts on his nose, the smudges achingly visible from her vantage point. She wanted to pluck the glasses off his face, clean them with the hem of her nightgown, but such doting drove him crazy, made him act like a golden retriever at bath time. Hold on, I lost it. Well, there you go. She looked down at her own reading material, last month's issue of People, and tried to focus on the interviewed Elizabeth Moss, but the words all ran together on the page. She couldn't focus. How could she? The rest of the day passed in a dreamlike state. A trance, maybe. She imagined hypnosis might feel like this. After debating whether to call the cops and tell them what exactly, she'd spent several hours in the front yard. Wait. She spent several hours in the front yard picking at the landscaping with a trowel in a pantomime of productivity. Eventually, she got a sunburn on the back of her neck and was forced inside. That's when she had the bright idea to barricade the basement door. Maybe it wouldn't stop the large man who was somehow capable of disappearing into a tiny crawl space, but it made her feel better. Good enough that she could grab a blanket and sit on the couch, rocking back and forth, shaking like she had the flu. Some of that might have been the sunburn. By the time Damien came home, and she was actually glad to see him, so perverse was her afternoon, the tension in her muscles was fading. She'd begun convincing herself that she hadn't actually seen a man in the basement. Ghosts didn't exist, and if they did, they certainly didn't concern themselves with bored college dropouts who couldn't accept the fact they'd accidentally become homemakers. Sabrina went over everything she'd done that morning, what she'd eaten, maybe the eggs had gone south, double-checked the carbon monoxide detectors in case deadly fumes were messing with her mind. Thankfully, nothing. She'd read somewhere, Cosmo maybe, that sometimes the mind, without proper stimulation, will choose to stimulate itself. Make up flights of fancy, even hallucinations, out of utter boredom. But that wasn't her. How could she be bored when she was so much work to do to get the new house presentable? After Damien trudged up to his room, Sabrina caught a glimpse of herself in the hall mirror. She looked crazy, and the blockaded basement door was a physical testament to her insanity. Grudgingly, she put the chair back in its place in the dining room before Michaela got home, went upstairs to fix her makeup. The rest of the evening passed in a typical domestic fashion. Minor arguments over homework and vegetables and chores, and now she finally had Hal to herself. Part of her wanted to tell him everything about the experience and her bizarre tension-ridden afternoon. But another part of her wanted something else altogether. Sabrina gave Hal's arm a light stroke. The tiny hair stood on end. A shiver convulsed his body. "Ooh," he said, dog-earing his current page. Afterwards, her head resting on his chest, pleasantly spent. Hal and her had always clicked physically, and unlike some of the guys she dated in her Hooters days, she definitely gave as good as he got. And then some. Sabrina's eyes fluttered shut. She was drifting off when the bedroom door banged open. Sabrina screamed. The big man from the basement stood in the doorway, filled the doorway, holding a cardboard box. Smiling, he approached the bed, waggling his eyebrows. Sabrina sat frozen, her mouth hanging open from the scream still resounding in her ears. Something inside the box moved, a slight straining at the packing tape, and then with a slight shrip, the tape parted. The box peeling open, yawning open, and whatever was in the box, Sabrina didn't want to see. Dear God, she didn't want to see. "Hun?" Sabrina blinked. The man and his box were gone. She was lying in bed with her husband, the covers twisted around her legs. Hal stared at her, brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" Sabrina swallowed, heart racing, looked around the room. Everything seemed in its proper place. The door shut, and Hal could be oblivious at times, but no way he'd miss a sizable man barging into the bedroom, especially post-coitus. "I think so," Sabrina managed. Clearly, she'd imagined everything, and if she'd imagined that, it stood to reason she'd imagined the experience earlier, but why? Overactive imagination? Or something worse? Something like a brain... No, she didn't want to think it. "I used to get that falling dream a lot," Hal said, leaning back into the pillows. "You know, the one where you're drifting off to sleep and all of a sudden, bam, you jerk awake. And man, back to square one?" He gazed wistfully at the ceiling, fondly remembering all the times he'd startled awake. "I remember," Sabrina said. He'd almost knocked her out of bed while pregnant with Michaela. Thankfully, she'd caught herself on the frame of their old four-poster. "Was it like that?" Sabrina shook her head slightly. It would be easy, so easy to tell Hal yes, like that. And he'd mix some sports metaphors, and they'd turn off the bedside light and fall easily into their respective slumbers. Except there was a box of Hal's old sporting equipment sitting down in the basement. One she'd never put there. Someone had. Hal? Something about her tone must have gotten his attention because he looked at her sharply, pushed himself up onto her forearm. "What, hun?" Sabrina worried at the hem of their comforter, trying to figure out the right way to ask what she wanted. A way that wouldn't make her sound crazy. Finally, she said, "Do you know who owned this house before us?" "Yeah, the bank." "Oh, definitely explained the deal they'd gotten. Before that..." "Didn't ask. Probably someone upside down on their mortgage. Buy low, sell high, right?" He did a little fist bump in the air. Well, that didn't help. At the same time, the answer wasn't dispositive. At least he didn't tell her the previous owners were murdered, hacked to death in the very bedroom where they lay. Or the basement. She shivered, wrapped the comforter tightly around her body. "Hun, are you sure you're okay?" She wasn't going to say anything. She knew how it would sound. She really wasn't going to say anything, and then, Hal, do you believe in ghosts? Outside Hal and Sabrina's bedroom door, Damien turned to his sister, a smirk creeping into his normally impassive features. Told you she's gone crazy. Tuesday. Michaela couldn't sleep. Her bed didn't feel right. Even though it was the same mattress from her old room in Columbus, she just tossed and turned and bunched up her pillow underneath her, kicked the sheets off, got cold, pulled them back on, startled at every unfamiliar creak and groan, and every time she looked at the shadows in the corner, she couldn't quite figure out what was making them. Mostly, she was royally pissed off. 7th grade was terrifying enough, but getting yanked out of Rosenberg Middle only a few weeks into the school year, then dragged across like 6 states to start all over somewhere else? Practically kidnapping. She googled CPS to see if they could do anything, but ultimately never called. Too worried they'd laugh at her. Oh, your parents want to move? We got kids with real problems, dummy. The prospect of starting a new school scared her. At least at Rosenberg, she had her best friend, Gracia. 2 days before, standing in Gracia's driveway, they'd promised to keep in touch, to be best friends forever. They'd even created a super complicated plan for how they could go to junior prom. Still 4 years away. Then, on the way home, Damien had wrapped his hand in hers and leaned his head on her shoulder. Mom, busy singing along to a Taylor Swift song on the radio, she'd realized her whole life in Columbus was dead. Deader than her 5th grade class hamster, Michaela. She'd cried for days when the class voted to give the hamster the same name as her, and her stupid teacher, Mrs. Freeling, called it a good lesson in democracy, whatever that meant. She'd spent untold hours staring into the mirror, wondering if her upturned nose and disturbingly small chin were actually rodent-like, or if the kids were being cruel for unknown childish reasons. Maybe a little both. Once the other Michaela died, thanks to garlic cloves stealthily dropped into her cage, the other kids seemed to forget the episode completely and became her friends again. Except for Daryl, who wore a black armband every day for the rest of the year and broke into uncontrollable weeping every time Mrs. Freeling called on the real Michaela. But he was weird and nobody liked him anyway. This sucks, Michaela hissed. It's not so bad, Damien said softly from the doorway. Michaela stifled a yelp and lunged, grabbing her little brother and tickling him. He hated that. Damien squirmed, writhing in her grasp. Stop! Michaela let him go. He wiped his ear with the hem of his shirt, shooting her filthy looks. Brought it on yourself, Michaela said. Damien huffed, sat down in her desk chair. How do you feel about all this, anyway? The move? A question neither mother nor father had bothered to ask. She bit her lip. Sucks. Damien nodded quickly. No one asks you, right? What do you want, Damien? Damien stood, stretching his thin bones. Just checking up on my big sister. I'm not an idiot. Fair enough. You heard Sabrina earlier. I'm thinking we can use this. How? She's already got herself all twisted around. I've been playing with her for years, but now we can do something. Something big. Michaela worried the comforter. I don't think... With all due respect, dear sister, Damien said. Cheshire grinned, stretching his face. That is my department. So it began. I'm gonna take a short break. Hold on. It didn't seem like they were actually intentional typos, Eisenheim. They were in weird places that they really shouldn't have been. And also, why did Damien call his mom Sabrina? But anyway, let me continue. Damien and Michaela left for the bus stop, and Sabrina's pulse immediately ratcheted up several notches. Usually, it was a relief. She could resort to being Sabrina rather than Mom. Not now. Part of her wanted to run to the bus stop, drag them both back home. For years she craved alone time. Now? She still wasn't alone. She wished she could go back to those busy, buzzy mornings before her trip to the basement, before all the promise the beautiful new house contained had been tainted with horror. But she couldn't. Sabrina put the chair back against the basement door, just in case, then went into the kitchen and made herself some tea. She preferred coffee, but needed some to calm her nerves, not rattle them. Even so, the screaming of the teapot nearly made her jump through the window. After, she sat at the kitchen table, sipping a stale and unsatisfying packet of chamomile, hyper-vigilant. She sorely needed sleep, had precious little the night before, waking every time she drifted off. Late, very late, had finally fallen asleep, only to suffer from the most horrible dreams. She couldn't remember a single one, only the way they made her feel. Awful. Hal, for his part, had been supportive, if skeptical. Offered to let her drive him to work so she could keep the car, but she declined. What was the point? If they were going to continue living in the house on James Circle, and, unless Hal got an even better job offer somewhere else, they wouldn't be moving anytime soon. And she had to make her peace with it. She couldn't walk around jumping at shadows in her own house. She'd go crazy. Become those women who drowned her own children in the bathtub or drove her car into the lake. Once her car arrived, whenever that might be. Sabrina reached for her mug, tea spilling over the rim. Were her hands really shaking that badly? She sipped. Too hot. Put it back down. Drummed her fingers lightly on the edge of the saucer. She really needed to compose a to-do list. There were a never-ending number of things she needed to do. But she couldn't concentrate. She kept looking from one doorway to another, cooking her head to listen for sounds she'd only thought she heard. Maybe if you turned on the TV, that wouldn't help. A little ambient sound to disguise any noises the house made, natural or otherwise. She went into the living room, flipped on the TV. Static roared through the speakers. Nothing but snow on the screen. She'd forgotten. Neither cable nor internet were hooked up yet. When was the cable guy coming? She couldn't remember. She went into the kitchen, grabbed the magnetic whiteboard off the fridge, and sat down to compose that deferred to-do list. Their communal laundry basket in the upstairs closet was already overflowing, after 2 days. But no, she had more stuff to put away and organize, pictures to hang, furniture placement decisions she wanted to revisit. Or she could take a bath, play some relaxing music on her phone, light a few candles, slip into a warm, bubbly broth and lose herself for a few moments. She could already feel her heartbeat slowing back to something resembling its resting rate. Leaving her tea mostly untouched, Sabrina headed upstairs. The chair was still jammed under the basement doorknob, right where she left it, and that made her feel better. Perhaps she'd imagined things, or maybe only the basement was haunted. She could live with that, right? Make Hal do the laundry. He wasn't some clueless detergent commercial husband who'd drink bleach before he ever used it on his whites. Hell, he wouldn't even mind. He often tried to do little things around the house. She chased him off. Downright territorial with a Swiffer. As she passed the basement door, the knob jiggled. Sabrina froze, 1 foot raised. Oh no. She stared at the knob, but it didn't move again. It had moved though, hadn't it? If she could imagine a large man toting her boxes down the basement steps, she could certainly imagine a doorknob twisting off its own accord. Couldn't she? Or... Carefully, Sabrina took a single step back. The doorknob jiggled again. Stepped forward. Nothing. Stepped back. Jiggle. She giggled, like she was back in college at a frat party, tipsy on wine coolers. Giggled. And then laughed, stomping on the board in question, making the doorknob jiggle over and over again. It's an old house. What do you expect? Sabrina wiped tears from her eyes, shaking her head at her own silliness. Not that this explained everything. No amount of creaky boards could manifest a large, box-moving, disappearing man. But this one thing, this single rational explanation lifted the weight off her shoulders. The laughter, the release, was exactly what she needed. She felt at home in her new house in a way she'd not since they moved in. She left the chair in its place, though. Until she figured out what was going on in the basement, or a sufficient amount of time had passed for her to discount the memory entirely. She wasn't quite ready to leave the door unsecured. Still, Sabrina headed upstairs, maybe not bounding per se, but definitely with a newfound spring in her step. Head nearly spinning with thoughts of a hot, bubbly bath and all the delicious decadence it promised. She pushed open the bathroom door, registering the light on in the bathroom. Hal must have left it on, she thought. He'd been the last one in the bathroom. Right? The second she stepped into the bathroom, she knew that wasn't true. Hal hadn't been the last person in the master suit at all, after all. If he had, the bathwater in the tub would have gone cold a long time ago. Short break, because there's... I'll just take these short breaks every time this little house is here. But the thing is that Damien was talking to his sister in that scene, and called his mom by the full name. So that was really strange, and the book earlier stated that he talks to his sister like a normal person. Might be an oversight. I don't know. Or maybe that's just what. Maybe Damien's possessed. Maybe he's Satan. And he just calls his mom Sabrina, yeah. But yeah, as an example of one of the typos, there's the street they're on is called something something circle, right? But earlier on it was called something something Circe, as in the L was missing. So, and there's a number of those. They could have gotten a better editor for this. or like a type checker, I suppose, not an editor. Anyway, let us continue. Damien wasn't looking forward to junior high. Grad school seemed much more his speed. But the one thing that seemed to recommend it over elementary was the ease with which middle schoolers could skip class. Or so he imagined. It had to be at least a little easier. Though changing classrooms 5 times a day gave one the opportunity to disappear, whereas sitting in Mr. Tuttle's 6th grade class did not. Tuthill himself was giving a staggeringly ahistorical lesson on the Battle of Thermopylae, grounded more in Zack Snyder's highly stylized 300 than any historical record. Damien snapped 3 pencils, fighting the urge to correct him. Xerxes had millions of troops, giant elephants, actual monsters, Tuthill said, drawing some sort of lobster-human hybrid on the board. But I'll let you in on a little secret, kids. Tuthill turned from the board, chalk in hand, an erection obscenely pushing out at the 27 children in his class. Huh? It's not the size of the army. It's all about the warrior mentality. See, when I was in the National Guard... Damien's hand shot up, almost of his own free will. Mr. Tuthill. Tuthill blinked. Yes, new kid? May I use the restroom? Don't you want to know who won? Damien smiled diplomatically. It's sort of urgent. Alright, spoiler alert, the Persian defeated Leonidas' army only because the blasphemous gimp... Damien cringed at the cruel and offensive description of Ephialtes, who might have been a traitor but didn't deserve such an ableist epithet. Tuthill continued bellowing, babbling, working up a sweat before eventually wearing himself out. His lank brown hair plastered to his forehead, bit stains spreading beneath his short-sleeved button-up. He finally grabbed the hall pass from his desk and handed it to Damien. Give him hell, son. Damien resisted the urge to salute him, instead said a quick thank you and headed for the bathroom. Unlike his old school in Columbus, Hooper actually put doors on the stalls. Damien appreciated the smidgen of dignity the gesture conveyed. Previously, he'd have to carefully schedule his bowel movements or, in a pinch, fake an illness so he could use the bathroom in a nurse's office, so as not to make poo-poo so exposed. Here, he could actually get a little time to himself. Nature wasn't even calling at the moment. No, he was driven by a far more pressing urge to get away from the disorderly Mr. Tuthill before he did something that would truly confirm Sabrina's suspicions vis-a-vis his supposed demonic sociopathic aspect. But alas, he wanted to check in with Michaela, make sure they were still on for after school. Damien sent her a quick text. How's her day going? He thought about sitting down, but didn't want to sully his trousers on the Shirley Cooties-infested seat. His phone pinged. Damien smiled. He'd gotten lucky. Maybe she'd gotten sick of her idiot teachers and taken a powder as well. And opened the message. Shouldn't you be in school? Same unknown phone number. Same overly familiar tone. Damien scowled at the phone. Whoever this was, they weren't funny. Ignoring the urge to send a rejoinder, undoubtedly far more incisive than anything the mystery texter could imagine, Damien simply blocked the number. He admired the graffiti on the inside of the bathroom door. Some very uncharitable but likely true things were said about Mr. Tuthill, with panache, and waited for Michaela to reply. Could be a moment. She'd likely to have to sneak out of class herself. His phone beeped. Another text from the mystery number he just blocked. You're not getting rid of me that easy. Right, Archibald wants out, so I'll just deal with that. Short break. Go. Meow, meow. Well, little boy, if you don't want to leave, you'll be on my lap instead. How about that, huh? What do you think about that business, huh, little guy? What do you think? Poo-poo so exposed. Archibald. You like my lab, don't you? I had something to comment on, but I forgot, I think. Anyway, let us continue. Sabrina woke up face down on the bathroom floor. She blinked, the tile cold against her cheek. She pushed herself up into a seated position, trying to figure out how she'd gotten there, or how she'd ended up on the floor of all places. None of it made sense. She looked around, hoping for some clue to explain her predicament. Nothing other than a fogged-up window. A wave of exhaustion roiled over her. Sabrina felt faint, so she leaned against the bathtub. The bathtub! Everything came rushing back. her unwanted morning tea, the curious step that made the basement doorknob jiggle, her luxurious decision to defer household chores in favor of a long, relaxing bath. She'd come upstairs intending to draw herself a bath, only to find the tub already filled. And recently, too. It wasn't merely some silently useless romantic gesture on Hal's part for her to find after he'd already headed off to work. No, the water had been hot to the touch. Not warm, luke, or otherwise. Piping hot. Now she peered into the tub, hoping to confirm her suspicions. Or not, as the case might be. The tub was empty, but a flufferance of bubbles around the drain marked this as a new development. She hadn't imagined a thing. Someone had filled the tub for her. The house drew me a bath. Had. The thought popped into Sabrina's mind unbidden, but it seemed right. Not to mention the only possibility, unless someone had broken in. Now that seemed to make even more sense. The same man who'd carried the box down to the basement? How closely had she inspected the crawl space anyway? Maybe he slipped into some hidey hole, some hidden passageway wriggling off into the earth, living in a secret alcove, an unofficial and unseen resident of the house. Maybe he was watching her right now. Sabrina gasped, looked about for a weapon. The bathroom offered nothing obvious because it was a bathroom, not an armory. A man that big would simply laugh if she tried to brain him with a shampoo bottle or a bar of soap. Wait, the towel rack. Something creaked out beyond the bedroom door. A long, slow noise, like someone, perhaps a very large man, leaning forward to peek around the door frame. Sabrina slammed the bathroom door shut, flipping the lock. The door was too flimsy to stand against the concentrated assault from the basement dweller, but it might give her time to do what exactly? Call 911. Sabrina's heart dropped into her stomach as she reached for her pocket, hoping she hadn't forgotten her phone downstairs. Thank God. She pulled out her phone, thumb fumbling across the screen, somehow managed to dial. The call took an interminable amount of time to connect, but then... 911, what is your emergency? Sabrina nearly fainted a second time from sheer relief. The police officer, a heavy-set bald man who looked like a shelled turtle but had a calm, attentive demeanor, scoured every inch of the house, from the front door to the basement, the children's rooms, the kitchen, the master bedroom, bathroom, and all, and found precisely nothing. Sabrina accompanied him downstairs, showed him the crawl space. He thoroughly inspected it with his mag light, combing every inch for hidden apertures and finding nothing but a rat hole. Why didn't you call us the first time, ma'am? He asked, tapping the side of the rat hole with his flashlight. Sabrina looked down at her house slippers. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I understand, ma'am, he said quietly, then suggested they go upstairs. After touring the rest of the house, they took a seat in the living room. Sabrina offered him one of Zephyr's sandwiches, but he declined. Watching my carbs, he said, patting his stomach. Now, a couple of things. He drew a small spiral-bound notebook from his pocket, but merely gestured with it. I changed the locks. Never know who's got a copy of the key when you buy a new place. Also, think about getting a security system. My brother's got a firm, best in Jackson Hill. I can get you his card if you want. Sabrina nodded. It couldn't hurt. Now, we checked the crawl space, and even though things couldn't have gone down the way you told me, the mind does funny things in times of stress. Entirely possible you did have an intruder and then he went back up the stairs. Maybe? Sabrina could clearly picture the man climbing into the crawl space. She didn't think she'd imagined it, but that explanation made a little more sense. Maybe she had gotten turned around somehow. You said he touched the box? The cop asked. That's right. The cop put the notebook back in his pocket. I can dust for fingerprints. Maybe something comes back. Maybe it doesn't. But I touched the box, Sabrina said. Maybe Hal, the kids, the movers. The cop shrugged. Not saying we'll find anything, but if this guy did break into your house, he might be in the system. Who knows? Okay. The cop went out to his cruiser, then back downstairs. He managed to smear fingerprint powder everywhere, but after a few minutes he declared he'd found some usable prints. Probably be a week or two, but I'll let you know. Footsteps echoed across the ceiling. Heavy. The cop drew his gun, motioning for Sabrina to get behind him. He trained his weapon on the stairs. Sabrina disappeared into a corner, trying to make herself tiny, disappear behind the washer. But secretly elated, someone else was about to see exactly what she had. The top step creaked. The cop sighted down his pistol, free hand reaching for the radio. You on the stairs! Don't move! Silence. Air pressurized like before a thunderstorm. Then, Sabrina? Hun? Sabrina looked up at the stairs. Hal stood at the top, briefcase in one hand, a bouquet of flowers in the other, and a very confused look on his, thankfully still intact, face. That ain't him, right? The cop said, already lowering his gun. Sabrina couldn't quite manage a sigh of relief. No. A short break here. Gotta watch my voice here with all these breaks, you know. It's a very slow build-up, this book, isn't it? But I'm enjoying it. It's not too bad. I like the creepy fat man. Just kind of creeping about. It's pretty good. And that dread of always having somebody else just kind of hanging out in the house with you. I'd be freaked out. But yes, thank you. I tried to not break the reading while multitasking. Let me just read the rest of this chapter and then I'm gonna take a break because I gotta run to the toilet as well. And I don't think I can manage to uninterrupt my reading while running to the toilet and also do my business at the same time, sadly. Let us continue. A block from the corner of Allen and Flanagan, Damien pulled the cord. Air brakes hissed. The bus rolled to a stop. Beside him, Michaela looked up from her phone. Still can't believe you talked me into this. Better be worth the bus fare. Damien flashed a special smile, the one reserved just for her. When have I ever steered you wrong? Michaela arched an eyebrow. Last 4th of July? Other than that. The Columbus County Fair? Oh please, cotton candy is essentially inedible anyway. She leaned in, lowering her voice. Disney World. Damien blinked. His sister did have a point. You getting off or what? The bus driver asked. Coming, Damien cried, springing from his seat. He practically dragged Michaela down the aisle, dodging the metal feet of elderly people's walkers and the actual feet of equally elderly people who didn't yet need them, almost kicking over a plastic grocery bag filled with Origins. No, they were the small ones, cuties. And finally down the steps. Thank you for your service, Damien called over his shoulder, but the accordion door had already slammed shut. No matter, they'd arrived at their destination, a slick modern shopping center anchored by Ralph's Grocery, bookended by drugstores and nail salons, but most importantly featuring Jackson Hill's soul. Forever 31, Michaela said, breathlessly, their seconds ago argument about Damien's plan and her money already forgotten. The Halloween store, a seasonal pop-up chain that took over abandoned storefronts and filled them with death, sat directly beside Ralph's. A 15-foot-tall inflatable reaper beckoned, scythe waving in the wind, while all manner of vampires, werewolves, and pumpkin-headed axe murderers stalked the sidewalk. Let's go, Damien said. They crossed the parking lot. the Reaper looming larger, the sound of the motor humming louder. A mesmeric drone that glazed their eyes and slacked their jaws. Even Damien, who normally scoffed at spooks and shadows, felt a tingle of excitement lance through his body. And not just because he planned to shoplift some mallow cream pumpkins. The automatic doors whooshed open. They entered, minds bedazzled by the arrays of blinking lights, the rows upon rows of decorations, costumes, and makeup. Fall scents filled the air, aerosolized pumpkin spice, apple cinnamon, browning leaves. "Melpu?" asked a tall woman wearing a zombified elk head and name tag reading Shani. "What?" The woman pulled her mask off, looking flushed and sweaty. "Sorry, hard to breathe in that thing. Can I help you?" "Just browsing," Damien said quickly. "Come on, sis." Michaela seemed entranced by a pair of talking gargoyles, so Damien yanked her sleeve. "We really need to figure out our costumes this year." "Not now, we're on a mission." She had a point, though. The Haskin siblings had a long-standing Halloween tradition of wearing matching outfits. Over the years, they'd been Sid and Nancy, Ronald and Nancy, Jeff Gillily and Nancy. Damien enjoyed that latter one because he got to wear a sparkly figure skating outfit, and everyone at school looked appropriately horrified when a ski-masked and mustachioed Michaela rushed out of the locker room and pretended to smash him in the knee with a telescoping baton. The only problem was keeping their Halloween shenanigans. That word always made Damien giggle. Secret from their parents, particularly Sabrina. Damien usually spent the earlier part of Halloween Eve standing silently in the corner or whispering creepy things to Sabrina like they're here, before sneaking out to go trick-or-treating with his sister. "What about Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell?" Michaela asked, pausing in front of the rack of truly terrifying political masks. Damien cringed. "Can't I go with someone who isn't named Nancy this year?" "Why?" "We're running out of Nancys. They're not the most notable people." Michaela's eyebrows knitted together briefly. Then she smiled. "We haven't done Nancy Grace and Casey Anthony." "Will there be a blood-drenched baby doll involved?" "Duh." Damien stuck out his pinky. "Deal." Michaela shook it. "Now, let's not forget why we're here." They headed off down the aisles. Damien knew exactly what he needed to take his lifelong practical joke on his mother to the next level. The costume blood was a problem. None of it smelled enough like actual blood for his taste, but they really did make some astoundingly realistic prosthetic these days, and Damien figured he could cross the blood bridge when they got there. After all, practically everyone he knew was full of the stuff. They were standing in the checkout line, waiting for a beleaguered mother of triplets to buy 3 Spider-Man costumes, when Michaela's phone rang. She ignored it. A minute later, Damien's went off too. "Father," he said, holding up his phone so she could see it. Odd. Hal rarely called. Sabrina was the family's communication director. The triplet mom completed her triple Spidey purchase, and the clerk, Shani from earlier, off the floor and no longer wearing her too hot mask, motioned them forward. That's when the 9/11 text began. Okay, that's another short break. I shall run off and run off some pee off my bladder, so be right back. Wow. I have returned from the toilet. There were no ghosts, sadly. Let's see. Man, my throat, man. I'm gonna read a little bit longer and then maybe we'll stop and just do something else for a little while. I don't know. We will see. I gotta preserve my mouth and throat for the good of myself. Especially more Pathfinder tomorrow. And all the voice acting we'll have to do. Alright. At dinner, Hal couldn't leave her alone. Sabrina kept her gaze level down at her plate, and hastily cobbled together a mishmash of Zephyr sandwiches, plus baked potato, and didn't say much, pushing her food from one quadrant to the other. Hal wasn't mad per se, but was making far more of the incident than he needed to, turning it into something between near-death experience and the joke. Also, of course, at her expense, of course. I thought that cop was gonna... Hal sighted down his butter knife, pretended to blow holes in the fridge. Bam, bam, bam! Michaela giggled, then tensed, putting a hand over her mouth and looking at Sabrina. Damien predictably said nothing. Hal tried to spin the butter knife like an old West gunfighter, but it went sailing end over end, bouncing off the cabinets. He offered the table an bemused grin. Wyatt Earp I'm not, kids, and got himself a new knife from the drawer. You weren't using the first one, Sabrina thought, annoyed he was making more work of her, but didn't say anything. After all, she couldn't just slip the knife back in the silverware if she wanted. No one would notice. So, Hal said, laying his new butter knife at the top of his plate, your mom thinks the house is haunted. Hal? He winked at the kids, doing his worst father knows best impression. Hun, it's fine. We don't keep secrets in this house, do we? No, Michaela said, her face spasming so badly she looked like she might fall out of her chair. That's right, Hal said, nodding to himself. We're a team. Back when I led the Truffle Hogs to the state championship... Semifinals, Sabrina suddenly corrected. If I kept the playbook to myself, the wide receivers wouldn't know what routes to run, now would they? The reference was effectively lost on every person in the room. Michaela played football, Damien nothing at all, and sports had never interested Sabrina much. Just a reason for men to get even drunker than they usually did and scream their feelings. They sure wouldn't, Daddy-O, Michaela said, nodding vigorously. She'd started doing this in the last year. This, knowing, exaggerated faux daddy's girl act. It pissed Sabrina off to no end. That's right, monkey, Hal said. This time, Michaela ignored the use of her most hated nickname, further confirming she was in the middle of a performance. The purpose of which Sabrina suspected was simply to push and pull on the power dynamics of the Haskins household, sowing tween girl chaos for its own sake. Too bad boarding school wasn't a thing anymore, or at least a thing within the squarely middle-class Haskins bubble, because Sabrina didn't relish the prospect of being trapped in the house with either of her soon-to-be pubescing spawn. Michaela playing these power games, and Damien might just hack them all to bits with an axe when his little body grew from boy to near man. Anyway, Hal said, we're a team, is the point. Team Haskins. So, what do you think, kids? Is the house haunted? Psh, as if, Michaela said, but without malice. Yes, Damien intoned blankly. Everyone turned to look at him. Damien speaking at dinner was a rare occasion, not unlike Haley's comet passing by in the night. Why makes you say that, buddy? Hal asked. Have you seen a ghost? He Scooby-Dooed his voice, punctuating the sentence with a full-body shiver. Damien shook his head, one slow, deliberate side-to-side swivel. Sabrina could almost hear the hinges of his neck squeak. Well, what then, bud? Why do you think the house is haunted? Sabrina leaned forward in her chair. As much as her youngest frightened her, perhaps if she was right about him, spawned from Satan's seed rather than Hal's, he could tell her what was going on. Who the big burly man was. Why a bath had been drawn for her. Maybe, just maybe, he'd be on her side. Damien looked from his father to his sister, to her, expression never changing. Peering deep into Sabrina's eyes, Damien said, library quiet, "Because they're hungry." Hal blinked. "Hungry? What's that mean, pal?" Damien took half a sandwich from his plate. He walked over to the wall beside the refrigerator, blank and pale blue. He turned back to the family, all staring at him with rapt attention. Especially Sabrina. "It means," Damien said, "they must be fed." He held out the half sandwich to the empty spot on the wall. 1 second it was in his little 10-year-old hand. The next second, it wasn't. Sabrina lay in bed, pretending to scroll Instagram. Hal next to her, engrossed in another Baldacci book. She envied Hal's ability to read so quickly. He had a different book in his hand practically every time she saw him. Something hadn't agreed with Hal, dinner-wise, because he kept grunting and rubbing his stomach. A slight gurgle audible through the comforter. Dinner hadn't agreed with Sabrina either, even though her stomach felt fine. She kept replaying the scene in her hand over and over. In her head. Damien walking through that utterly unremarkable spot on the wall, holding out his half sandwich. Then poof. Gone. She'd screamed, rushed at her son, grabbed his little stick arm so hard her hands left wicked red marks in his forearms just below the elbow. Shook him, demanding he tell her what he knew, until Hal pulled her away. "Sabrina, stop it! Stop it!" Hal repeated. But she wouldn't stop it. Couldn't stop it. She'd just seen a ghost eat a sandwich, for Pete's sake. The supernatural was real and hungry, and on more than nodding terms with her creepy little kid. Eventually Hal muscled her into the living room and took the kids to bed. They didn't talk about what happened, and after... Sabrina wasn't sure how long, the minutes didn't so much blur together as slip by unnoticed. They went to bed, her trailing him up the stairs, neither touching each other. The dishes in the sink nagged at her, but they'd keep. They brushed their teeth at his and hers sinks, changed, climbed into bed, a healthy couple inches between them. Hal muttered, shifting from one side to the other. Sabrina exited out of Instagram. She couldn't bear to look at any more of the dumb fitness mommy accounts she followed, and he almost felt like some cheap, tawdry form of self-abuse. Logic Brain knew the washboard abs poking out of tiny lycra shorts. The perfectly coiffed kids invariably named Scout or Toffer or Hunter. The family photo ops at their personal CrossFit gym in the backyard next to their infinity pool. All of it was a put-on, some carefully conjured alternate reality. A blink, a flash, a millisecond of perfection in a lifetime of dirty diapers, upended cereal bowls, crayon portraits all over the walls. How she would have loved to have a single moment as perfect as any of those dozens of photos the monstrous mommy models added to their feeds every day. Instead, she was stuck with all the other moments. She shot a glance over at Hal, still nose in book, but a fraught expression on his face, and debated for the millionth time what to say. Even though he'd seen exactly what she had, it didn't even seem to register. Everything she'd experienced had gone from a joke to a liability in his eyes. How much longer would he entertain her paranoid delusions? They're not. Were they? Enough. She had to know. Had to ask. Hal? He groaned lightly, fumbled for his bookmark, looked over at her, not even feigning interest. Yeah? You're okay, right? Just a little indigestion. Okay. That took all of 4 seconds. She swallowed, steeling herself. Tonight, before she was chewing her chicken to hamburger. You saw that too, right? The sandwich? He set the book on the nightstand, took off his glasses, folding them carefully, placed them alongside the book, stared off into the distance for a long moment, evidently considering his words. Hon, I'm not sure how to say this, so I'll just come out of it. Do you hate our son? The words hit her like a slap across the face. How could you say that? I'm not blind. I know how hard the pregnancy was for you, the postpartum. You never really been the same since. Hell, I emailed my boss earlier. Told him I'm working from home tomorrow. Also looked up some specialists. They got some very good therapists right here in Jackson Hill. Figured I'll make some calls, see if I can get you to talk to somebody. Sabrina leaned back into the pillows, folding her arms tightly across her chest. You think I'm crazy? No, hon. I think the move's been hard on you, but it's not just that. I've seen you with him, Damien. There's always been this distance. He scooted towards the edge of the bed. I'm just saying, it wouldn't hurt to have someone to talk to. Get it all out, you know. Get it all out. Part of her wanted to toss the covers off, grab her pillow, go sleep on the couch. But then she'd been closer to the basement, and the spot on the kitchen wall. Just think about it. All I'm saying, Hal got up and went into the bathroom. A bit later, the sound of running water came through the door, and Sabrina shivered, thinking about the bath that drew itself. Eventually, he came back in, lay down. She turned away, clutching her pillow tightly. After a long moment, she said, "Tell me you saw the sandwich, Hal." A light snore was the only response. Sleep was a long time coming for Sabrina Haskins. Again. Damien's phone beeped. "Michaela, downstairs, now." Damien threw off the covers, hurriedly changed out of his SpongeBob PJs, a private childish affectation he'd yet to shed and would be mortified if anyone ever discovered, and donned a simple silk robe instead, dark blue with a very grown-up wooden ship emblazoned over the breast pocket. He opened his bedroom door quietly and pattered down the stairs. A step creaked beneath his feet. He nearly cursed under his breath. He hadn't fully catalogued the house's noisy spots, something he very much needed to understand if he were to succeed in his current endeavors. Michaela waited in the dining room, seated at the long, formal table the family never used, preferring the more casual round table in the kitchen instead. Her arms were crossed, hair up in a ponytail. Meaning she meant business. "Sit," Michaela said quietly. Damien gave her a curt nod, pulled out a chair across from her, motioned for her to speak her piece. "The sandwich thing," she said without preamble. "Yes?" Michaela leaned across the table. "It's too much, Damien. You shouldn't have done that." That was what he'd been pulled out of bed for? His dinner table sleight of hand? Sabrina had reacted poorly, sure, but Damien had been quite proud of himself. A flick of the wrist and the half sandwich disappeared down his sleeve. Granted, he'd garnered some nasty stains on the inside of his shirt from whatever near gruel their hippie neighbors slathered over the bread, but still, worth it. Damien scoffed. If the woman can't recognize a rudimentary parlor trick for what it is, she doesn't deserve to be sane. Michaela rolled her eyes. "You can't see it, can't you?" She's not right. When has she ever been? Wait, don't answer that. I know precisely when she was right. The day before I was born. You had 2 years of normalcy, 2 years of motherhood, followed by 10 of something I'd consider close enough for government work. We should all be so lucky. Michaela drew her feet up under her, fussing with the sleeves of her hoodie. You know what I mean. Ever since we moved, she's been, I don't know, edgy. This whole thing about the house being haunted, which you believe. I do not. Please, Damien said. Admit you're open to the idea, at least. A long, long moment stretched out between them. Then, small, soft, yes. Nothing to be ashamed of, Damien said, leaning in himself now. Lots of... He almost said children. People believe in the supernatural. It's not real, obviously, but it's fun. Like our trip to the Halloween store earlier. Do you have to be so condescending? If you don't care for the message, disparage the delivery. If you're waiting for me to apologize, you'll be sitting in that chair until your skin shriveled to parchment. Michaela slapped the table, a loud report that echoed off the walls and made Damien fear she'd wake their parents. Just stop, okay? It's not about that, it's about Mom. She's not well, and you're making it worse. It was all fun and games until we moved into this house, but now? What? I don't know. Michaela slumped over the table, drawing her hoodie up over her hair, becoming a faceless shade. All I know is, you need to lay off, Damien. Stop messing with Mom. I won't. Then I'll tell. You wouldn't. Michaela's nails clattered across the table. I would. She drew herself up in her chair. I will. Silence hung in the air. Damien looked down at his own nails, direly in need of a trim, and considered his options. Lie to Michaela, his only confidant, or abandon his life project. Neither option seemed palatable. Tell them what exactly, he finally said. Michaela blinked. What? I said, what are you gonna tell them? That I've been pretending to be a demonic little imp? That I'm... Damien sighed. A perilously normal child, albeit an extraordinarily intelligent one? What will that accomplish? You cannot disabuse Sabrina of her beliefs. And father? I've never met a more oblivious life form, let alone human, in my 10 years on this planet. He sees nothing, knows nothing. I'd bet body parts he has no internal monologue whatsoever. But it's Dad. How many times have we mocked the idiots of the world? Are you really so surprised to find your own father counted amongst their number? Michaela retreated into her hoodie. You're really awful sometimes, you know that? Damien stood abruptly. You sound just like Sabrina. You know that? The dam burst. Michaela threw her head down on the dining room table, sobbing. Damien walked around the table, headed back to his beloved SpongeBob pajamas and bed. He bent down and whispered in his sister's ear. Stay out of my way. Michaela made a noise that might have been bastard, or might have been nothing at all. Either way, her histrionics changed nothing. Her participation in the plan had always been optional, just like her continued existence. End the chapter. What a bunch of bastards, these children, especially Damien, huh? I like the extraordinarily stupidly smart child. Why is he that? Like he's so smart. The hell? Why does he talk like that? He talks. I guess he talks like a movie child, doesn't he? Like he's too smart. I guess because this is like kind of a parody almost. And also, I like the twists here, like where it's the parents that are haunted, but the children don't see it. They're like, "What the hell? What are you doing, parents? Are you crazy?" Or at least the mom is haunted. Also, the dad sucks. Hell's a bozo. He sucks. The big one. He's like, you should talk to somebody, but not to me. Who even falls asleep that fast? He was pretending to sleep for sure. And Damien's probably also possessed or something by the devil. Wait till they grow up. They're gonna be serial killers, a lot of them. All of them. If the mom doesn't go crazy and kill them all first. Anyway, that was 2 straight hours of reading or so, I suppose that should be enough for now. We're about a third of the way through the book. So, we should be finished in about 2 extra reading streams, or maybe if I really feel like it, I can just do a whole stream just reading the book. We will see. We will see how my mouth feels at the end of next week. For sure. Archibald, you keep rattling my doorknob. Asking to leave. Guru. Meow. So I will let him out, and then I'll take a break and maybe see what I can do for the rest of the stream. Good. Yeah. That sounds about right to me. I will be right back.